Okay, so first of all, I would like to say good evening to everybody. First of all, to our presenters today and to the audience who are coming from different parts of the world. And we are very pleased to introduce today our symposium about excellence in education. And in this symposium, we are going to address best practices or international practices relating to this field of knowledge. So today we have 4 speakers. We have Don Ambrose, Peter Gamwell, we have Connie Phillips, and Ken Reimer. So we have 4 keynote speakers for today. And first of all, I would like to let you know that, this symposium was organized by 2 institutions, including the International Center for Innovation in Education and Baqa College, which is one of Al-Qasimi international educational institutions. And it is going to be moderated by me as representing the ICIE and Dr. Bahaa Zoabi as director of Baqa College. And this symposium will take place according to this structure. We will have 4 presentations that will be delivered. And after that, we will have questions to be answered by the presenters. And at the end of the symposium, we are going to introduce our future events, including our conference in Istanbul and other events. So there will be also, as I said, questions after, the 4 presentations. Our first presenter for today will be Don Ambrose. And I would like to introduce him in few lines for our new participants who never met with Don Ambrose. He is professor of graduate education at Rider University in New Jersey. He is the editor of Robert Review. As you know, Robert Review is one of the best journals in gifted education. He has initiated and led a large number of interdisciplinary projects involving eminent researchers and theorists from various fields of knowledge, including gifted education, general education, creativity studies, cognitive sciences, ethical philosophy, psychology, political science, economics, law, history, sociology, theoretical physics, and critical thinking. Examples of topics addressed by the many books he has published include interdisciplinary explorations of creative intelligence, the moral ethic dimensions of giftedness, 21st century globalization and its effects on creative intelligence, innovative holistic education for the gifted, and applications of complexity theory to high ability. In addition to that, Don serves on the editorial boards of many major journals in creative intelligence fields and for several book series, including our journal, which is the International Journal for Talent Development and Creativity. He won many international, national, regional, and institutional awards, including the National Association for Gifted Children in AGC Distinguished Scholar Award, the Outstanding Book Chapter Award from the American Creativity Association, and the ICIE Creativity Award. Books just published and currently under construction include Conception of Giftedness and Talent, of course, in partnership with Robert Steinberg, a volume on transformational giftedness and an exploration of creative constraints based on, of course, other structures. And sorry, I am disturbed by somebody writing on the screen. Don invented based on constructs from various academic disciplines. He has done invited keynote presentations throughout the world. So with our first presentation, it will be entitled Strengthening Education Through Interdisciplinary through interdisciplinary work and the new creative and the critical thinking strategies. I'm not going to read the abstract for this presentation. I will give Don Ambrose now the co-host, so he will be able to share his screen with us. So you are more than welcome, Don, in this symposium, and the platform now is yours.
All right.
I will stop sharing, and then you will have the screen.
Thank you very much, Taisir. Get this started. Okay. First, I want to mention a few things about Taisir and the ICIE. Taisir is a terrific transformationally gifted leader in the field and in the world. Some of the projects that Robert Sternberg and I have been working on have to do with transformational giftedness, which means using your outstanding talents to make the world a better place, instead of using them for transactional purposes for being selfish. And I believe Taisir is a great example of transformational giftedness. The ICIE is an excellent institution because it has the same kind of approach to work in the world. It's making the world a better place. So much of my work has to do with replicating those kind of things. Let's got to get this off of here. Okay. So we'll get started. This presentation is about interdisciplinary work. And I've been doing interdisciplinary work for several decades now, reading outside my field, collaborating with scholars from different disciplines. And I kind of think of it as wandering around outside one's own field. If you think of it metaphorically as walking around in a field, in a piece of land with a fence around it. Gifted education is one of those fields. General education is another one. Philosophy, psychology, sociology, those are neighboring fields. And there are natural science fields a little farther away. If one climbs over the fence and wanders around looking for gemstones in those other fields, and then brings them back into his or her own field, you are borrowing insights and trying to enrich your field with them. So one of the ways I'm trying to enrich the field of gifted education and general education is by creating new critical and creative thinking strategies based on ideas from these other fields. So I'll be showing you a few examples of those. But first, before getting into it, well, here's some of the projects that, I won't mention these in detail, but these are some of the projects from which those insights are being extracted. These are collaborative projects, most of them involving collaborators from diverse fields, such as economics, legal studies, history, theoretical physics, and on and on. But before getting into the strategies, as I mentioned, I want to give you a look at this, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing this work, and one of the reasons why the ICIE is doing its work, is that we have moved into the 21st century, and that century is very different from the 20th and the 19th and those that came before. This model shows you that. Think of it as a landscape, and if you go back in the early mid 20th century, that black arrow on the top of the landscape is the trajectory of a society, and it could be thought of as an individual as well, moving along the landscape, trying to achieve success, and success is the vertical dimension. The higher you are on the model, the more successful you are. Notice that it was pretty straightforward back in those days. There were complexities and uncertainties, of course. But in general, if you did certain things, you got to the end of it. And those certain things educationally were reading, writing, and arithmetic, and learning how to obey orders or how to give orders. But now that we are in the 21st century, well into it, we have confronted the 21st century globalization wave that's causing enormous change. The wave has success on the top of it, but it also has disaster underneath it, because the macro opportunities are 21st century events and phenomena that are creating possibilities for affluence and progress and self-fulfillment and ethical awareness, unprecedented. But if we don't make it up to the top of the wave, if we can't make that quantum leap from the bottom part, and we move forward into what's called the Hobbs Trap, we'll be trapped underneath 21st century macro problems like climate change, the erosion of democracy, resource shortages, a whole series of devastating phenomena. I call it the Hobbs Trap because it's named after a pessimistic 19th century philosopher, 18th century philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, who said that humans left to their own devices will create lives for themselves and for others that are poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So if we move into that trap, that's what life prospects for the majority, for the most of the people on the planet will be like in the remainder of the 21st century and beyond. Here, just a listing of some examples of macro problems and macro opportunities. They're color-coded. Macro opportunities are shown in yellow. The big problems are shown in blue. So notice that some of them are hybrids. They're both a problem and an opportunity, like exponential knowledge growth. The knowledge growth is great, but if it goes beyond our understanding of it, it could do big damage to us. The same thing with runaway technology. Technology is advancing very rapidly, and a lot of it's going to be good and some of it's going to be terrible. And we have to get a handle on that. Some of them are obviously just macro problems like dogmatism, narrow-minded, short-sighted, superficial, rigid thinking is the worst macro problem because it creates all of the others, or at least significantly contributes to them. So I won't get into the others, just a few examples there. But here's an example of a macro opportunity, macro problem combination or hybrid. They call it the singleton hypothesis, recently discussed in several disciplines as artificial intelligence advancing very quickly and unpredictably. And according to the scholars who are studying this, they're saying that it's making it possible and maybe even likely that global power is going to be concentrated someday in the future, maybe someday soon, in a single place. And it will either be very good or very bad or somewhere in between, probably very good or very bad, depending on how it operates. It'll either become an ethical democracy or an evil dictatorship run by artificial intelligence, or run by one or a few humans who are using artificial intelligence for their own selfish purposes. So obviously that could be a magnificently powerful positive for the future, or a devastating, destructive negative. So in order to make ourselves capable, and the kids coming up, capable of dealing with these macro problems and opportunities, we have to develop panoramic scanning capacities. I use this term to represent what's shown on the right-hand side. This is a visual metaphor. That's one of the strategies I'll mention shortly. The strategy of the visual metaphor, by the way, is to take a lot of academic content and translate it into a drawing or a painting. I'm an amateur artist, so I like doing this kind of thing, but I know people who are not artistic and who have benefited from the strategy as well. So in this example of the visual metaphor. We have the reality as represented by a translucent sphere. You can kind of see into the inner core, maybe, depending on what kind of a creature you are crawling around on the surface. It has external atmospheric levels of analysis. So if you're thinking about practical educational applications, you'll be working down, doing important work at the ground level in that bottom layer of the atmosphere. The research theory is the next layer up. The theory level is a bit above that, and the philosophical level is at the highest part of the atmosphere. Being in each level has its own advantages and disadvantages. For example, being a practitioner on the ground level means you know all the intricacies of the practical work, but you're having trouble viewing patterns on the large scale. If you're at the level of philosophical analysis, way up near outer space, you don't have the practical expertise. You don't know what's going on the ground that much. But you have the ability to see far-ranging events and phenomena emerging. So the creatures, notice that there are some little blobs on the surface that don't seem to be going anywhere. Those are low-level scholars and practitioners who aren't very creative, localizing themselves in one specific spot in a domain or field. And those domains are represented by the frost patterns on the surface. Notice a few other ground creepers have developed tentacles and they're moving outward, extending their practical work. However, they're moving down a little valley, trying to hide themselves from the cold winds of the zeitgeist. And the only ones that are growing in height and depth are these large panoramic scanning creatures. They go deep into the circle, into the sphere, where they extract intuitive insights, lightning strikes. They also stretch high up into the atmosphere, so they're able to see the ground level, the theoretical and research levels, and the philosophical levels, and they're able to synthesize all of those levels together. That enables them to stretch outward. They've got tentacles going in multiple directions, stretching out over far reaches of the terrain. So that makes them interdisciplinary. We need to create more panoramic scanners in the field. Just one other example of a macro opportunity. I won't get into the details of this, but there are natural scientists, most notably Michael Nielsen, a physicist, who is discussing the power of networked science now. So if you watch this in this visual metaphor, we have two arrows, an orange arrow, and that's a small dogmatic individual or group, and they are insular. They don't communicate or borrow ideas from the outside. So they wander around on the academic landscape and eventually fall into a dogmatic sinkhole, and they don't escape from it. Notice the blue arrow is an insular but highly creative individual or small group. Big advantages being highly creative, but not having much going on in terms of idea sharing. So that individual or group is able to climb up on top of that plateau, a small mediocre solution mesa in the terms of a desert landscape. But notice all these little dots crawling around all over. Those are individuals, each of whom has a small piece of what Nielsen calls micro expertise. They all have pieces of the academic puzzle. And when they network throughout the world, they bring their ideas together, and they're able to climb to the top of the highest part of the landscape. So that's just one example of how technology can benefit us considerably. I mentioned dogmatism as narrow-minded, superficial, short-sighted, rigid, distorted thinking, and it causes most of our difficulties in the world, societally, culturally, economically, warfare, corruption, exploitation. The character here is an example of a concept cartoon, which is a strategy that I recommend everyone get familiar with, because a concept cartoon is like a visual metaphor. It has the power of pulling together a lot of ideas from academic concepts and making them more visible to an audience. So in this case, I created this guy, Pundit Ogasbeg, to represent the fake news problem that we're faced with in today's world, where this guy is a talk show host at Weasel News. He's a pundit because he's recognized as an expert, even though he's not very worthy. And he's a gas bag because he's full of hot air. And the metaphor has some humor in it too. He sacrificed his brain capacity to make room for his enormous mouth because the head has only so much room in it. So there's a few preview strategies. I want to show you more strategies now. And Taisir, when you think I've run out of time, just let me know, okay? Because I could go on all day about these. So these are tools that I think we can use to help address the macro problems and macro opportunities. Quite a while ago, I invented this machine, which is at that time was just a cardboard, circle cardboard on a cardboard background with pictures stuck on them. And the idea is for the kid to make his or her own invention wheel, find pictures in magazines and catalogs, cut them out and paste them on, both the wheel and the background, and then pick one of the pictures on the wheel, spin the wheel, and when the wheel stops, the picture is going to point at one of the pictures on the outside. I remember watching a grade 2 class do this, and a little girl had a car, like an ordinary vehicle, on her wheel. She spun the wheel and it pointed at a teddy bear. And so you could see the light bulb go on over her head. She said to her, she was talking her ideas out loud, and she said, okay, my car pointed at the teddy bear. I know I can take teddy bear legs and put them on the bottom of the car where the wheels are. And that means my car will be able to walk really fast and really far. I live on the other side of a lake from the town we always go to shop. So we always have to drive all the way around the lake. Now my car can just walk across the lake because its wheels are real tall. So pretty creative idea for a little kid. But you can use this at a higher level too. This might be a high school or graduate school level. I created this example to help some high school history teachers think creatively about their curriculum. In this example, we have American presidents on the wheel: President Obama, Teddy Roosevelt, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, etc. Some from ancient times like Washington, Lincoln, George W. Bush. And then there are philosophers around the outside, some of them ancient philosophers like Hypatia from Egypt and Aristotle from ancient Greece, Thomas Hobbes, mentioned earlier, from Europe. And then there's some of them are modern, like Martha Nussbaum and Kenneth Appiah, and Hannah Arendt is a fairly recent one. So the idea here is to make up a question, pick a president, spin the wheel, see who the president points at, and then speculate about whether or not the president would bring this philosopher into the cabinet, the administrative cabinet, to make things work better. And I saw a high school kid use this wheel, chose Lyndon Johnson, spun the wheel, and it pointed at Thomas Hobbes. And as I've told you, Thomas Hobbes was the pessimistic philosopher. And Johnson has to think, would I want Hobbes in my cabinet? And the kids decided, yes, Johnson would have picked Hobbes because his portrayal of nasty, brutish, short, human evil-doing would justify Lyndon Johnson's continuance of the Vietnam War. And a couple of other things would come into play there as well. And then, of course, the students can argue about this speculation. Another strategy is the chaos complexity order analysis model. Based on complexity theory, one of the main theories in that field is that there is the chaos order continuum. Complex adaptive systems go from excessive chaos in one end to excessive order on the other, with a sweet spot in between the edge of chaos where there's optimal balance. And where that balance occurs between chaos and order, there is increasing complexity. And you want complex adaptive systems like a human mind to develop complexity. So if you were using this as a teaching strategy, you could ask students to analyze history or political systems or business environments according to where they fit on the order and chaos continuum. And they might say that government regulation moves back and forth on this model. If you go way off to the far end of order, you end up in territory where the government is dictatorial, like in the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, where the government imposed too many regulations and made things too orderly, and the economic system and social system dropped down in terms of productive complexity and poverty became the rule. On the other side, excessive chaos means too much government deregulation, as happened in the United States in the early 2000s, where government deregulated the financial system and the economy, and corruption came to the surface, and we had the 2008 economic collapse, which was a time of great chaos. So students can analyze virtually any complex adaptive system using this strategy. One of the strategies that is fairly well known out there, the ones I've shown you so far are my inventions. This is one that's not my invention, but it's used to generate creative thinking. It's just a simple what if question. You can ask kids in a class or colleagues in your system a what if question about virtually any topic. And another one that's fairly well known is Scamper, which stands for substitute, combine, adapt, modify, magnify, minify, and all of these other possibilities. So I recall watching a group of middle school students scampering a car, an automobile, and they said things like, let's substitute tank tracks for the wheels so the car can drive way up hills in the desert and doesn't have to get stuck. Or combined purposes, they thought, well, that's already been done, where cars take you places, transportation, but they also entertain you. You get to listen to music and things like that. So you have combined purposes there. What else could be used or done or put to other uses? Those two possibilities. One example they came up with is, let's take a car out to a place in the desert where there's been a drought and dig a deep, deep well and put a pump in it, and then put the car up on jacks and take the tires off and attach big belts to the tires that go to the pump. And then we can pump water from this deep well up and help the population survive and thrive. The minify part was interesting. They said, let's shrink the steering wheel of a car to make it the size of a doorknob. And if we do that, then we can put the steering wheel down in between the two seats and steer it like we're playing a game, and then we can just read a magazine while we drive. They had a whole bunch of other ideas. Visual data animation. This is Hans Rosling. He's a scientist who's developed enormous amounts of data into visual data animation. In this example, I don't have it operating for you, but you can see these circles on a graph showing income on the horizontal scale and lifespan in the vertical scale. And he showed how a couple hundred years ago, most of those circles were down in the lower left corner, short lifespan, low income. But then as we moved toward the 21st century, a lot of the circles got bigger and moved up into the right-hand corner because they were being more prosperous than their lifespans were expanding. So there's tens of thousands of pages of research embedded in this graphic model that moves around. Another strategy, the rest are mostly my inventions now, is macro problem analysis. I mentioned macro problems in the world today. They are international, interdisciplinary, and long-term. So the student, this would probably be a gifted class, trying to figure out whether something is a macro problem, like climate change or like the erosion of democracy. So they would have to figure out, is this problem international? They do some research to figure that out. Is it interdisciplinary? Is climate change interdisciplinary? Yeah, it involves biological sciences, it involves economics and sociology and so on. And then how can it be addressed? Intellectual spectrum analysis is using this metaphorical spectrum, showing visible intelligence in the middle, superficial, narrow, standardized test scores, like in the colors of the rainbow in the electromagnetic spectrum. But there are abilities on the outside that are really important, but not as visible because they're difficult to measure, like the visual metaphorical insight that Einstein came up with to develop the theories of relativity. Or aesthetic appreciation. Why is the appreciation of beauty important as an intellectual capacity? It turns out that most of the innovations in the natural sciences come from scientists pursuing the beauty of the phenomena they are studying. So it's an important ability. WIX, wisdom, intelligence, creativity synthesized, an idea of Bob Sternberg. And defergitus, deferring judgment, a whole series of others. So students can use this to analyze things that are happening in the world, and they can use it to analyze their own abilities. Mentioned concept cartoons before, I won't get deeper into that. And visual metaphor, this is a visual metaphor showing what this presentation is all about, how the mass of humanity is walking along progress road, walking backward with blinders on, being led by 19th century leaders. Even though they're in the 21st century, they're still thinking at the 19th century level, heading toward the precipice point where they'll all fall off into the depths of despair. Alternatively, they can climb that path upward and try to get to a much more purposeful ethical place. Last chance ladders there if they go too far. They've got the chasms of early warning to make them aware if they can look beyond their blinders. And then there are some leaders from the 19th and 20th and early 21st century standing on the Anthropocene foothills looking forward, warning people about going too far on this. So there's lots more to that, but it's just another example of a visual metaphor. This one I won't get much into either. It's based on a photographer's fantastic images, photographer artist, Erik Johansson. Here he created an image of a gigantic diamond that scraped along the ground. And the idea here is that I remember a student doing this, a girl in high school, thought of this as two giant people in another dimension. They're as tall as the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. That's how big people are in that dimension. And this diamond is on a ring that she was proposing to her future husband with, and a gigantic creature, a gigantic bird, flew down, grabbed the diamond out of the ring, flew away, came to a shimmering light in the sky, got scared, dropped the diamond, and it went through a wormhole into the space between Earth and the moon, and it landed on Earth and made this big scrape. So she said, I'm going to write that story. That's going to be the first chapter of my book. Second chapter is going to be what happens when people find this thing, and are they going to fight over it, and so on. I mentioned WIX, wisdom, intelligence, and creativity synthesized. This is a strategy I created based on Bob Sternberg's theory, where wisdom, wise action is at the top of the pyramid, stupid, thoughtless action is at the bottom, intelligent and creative idea generation is in the second level, but that can be both good or evil. For example, the 2008 economic collapse I mentioned earlier happened because intelligent, creative people in the financial industry were not ethical. They lacked the W, the wisdom part. So they did serious harm to the world. So the arrows going off to the right show you how harmful or beneficial the action is. And the red numbers represent how ethical the action was. Moral legal overlap analysis, where you have legal and illegal behavior on the horizontal dimension, immoral and moral behavior in the vertical dimension. And then you plot events in the world or actions of individuals or groups onto this thing and decide where does it go? Like number one is extremely legal and extremely immoral. And one might make the case that the United States Supreme Court decision in Citizens United a little while back, it fits there because it's perfectly legal because the Supreme Court created it after all, but it's highly immoral because it sold off democracy to the highest bidder, meaning a few billionaires can buy the government and its operations. That's a rather extreme interpretation, but it actually is happening. Number 4 in the upper left corner, Mahatma Gandhi freeing India or helping India free itself from British colonial rule. Highly moral, highly ethical, but illegal because Britain controlled the laws of the time. So students can get into arguments about where things fit on here. Undermining your own position can make your ideas stronger if you can help students realize that, hey, I should tear down my own idea, because doing so will help you see its weaknesses and maybe strengthen it and make it a better idea, or help you replace it with one that's better. The jurisprudential model, this is the idea of back and forth between pluses and minuses. I think I'm getting close to running out of time, right? Okay, I'll keep going until somebody stops me. This is one where you just try to find a middle ground between two extreme positions.
You could have 5 minutes more, Don.
Okay, thank you. Okay, altruistic analysis. This is based on identity formation ethical philosophers have come up with. They've determined a difference between universalist and particularist morality. Particularists are people who are kind, generous, and thoughtful to others within their identity group, their race, religion, nationality, class, and so on. But they can be dismissive of or exploitative of or harmful to outsiders, people who don't look like them or aren't from their identity group, up to and including genocide. So they can be ordinary decent people in one way, but evil on the other side of them. Whereas universalists are kind, generous, and thoughtful to outsiders as well as insiders. And these philosophers discovered through empirical research that people fit into those two categories. So this strategy is based on that distinction. How can we use the insights about particularism and universalism to study something that's happening in the world, or to study our own actions in the world? Personal responsibility determination is another strategy I just invented in the last few months, based on some scholars' work on the study of personal responsibility. They say about half a century ago, in most societies, personal responsibility was determined to be look after yourself, you're responsible for yourself, but also when you can, help other people. It was a broad ranging kind of personal responsibility. They're saying over the last 5 decades that our personal responsibility in many societies has disintegrated to the point where now it's conceived to be look after yourself, be self-sufficient. But the looking after others has just been filtered away. It's just gone, or at least for the most part. And down at the very, very bottom, you have parasitic behavior of psychopaths who care nothing about anybody but themselves. So the student using this would be thinking, how does this event in history, how does the actions of some of the people in this event in history fit on this? Were they at the top of this model? Were they at the bottom? Were they in the middle? And they can analyze their own behaviors as well. And then there's a few others here, which I won't get into. Worldviews have to do with 4 different metaphors that help you see reality differently: mechanism, organicism, contextualism, and formism. And I've created the model to look like a wheel that spins over your eye. So if you're looking through the mechanistic lens, you see everything as measurable, and you strive for prediction and reduction. Whereas organicism is very different. It's a holistic perspective. And this is just an example of how education fits on there. So there's about 30 more strategies, but I won't get into them yet. Just trying to finish them off and turn them into something that can be spread around the world a little more. So that's it for this session. And again, thank you very much, Taisir, and thank all of you for taking the time to listen.
Please open your mic, Dr. Taisir.
Thank you so much, Don, for your presentation. It is excellent and informative, and it helps us to translate theory into practice. And how could we, in the future, make these practices available in the classroom according to your integrative approach, interdisciplinary integrative approach. And as I said, I'm still struggling for finding the right words to express my right feelings and thoughts about your presentation. Thank you so much, and we will see you again at the end of the symposium in order to answer any related questions to this presentation. Thank you again. So now I will go back to our slides in order to introduce the second speaker. So for the second part of this symposium, we have with us Professor Peter Gamwell, and Peter draws on decades of first-hand experience in education, creativity, leadership, and learning. Backed by cutting-edge research, he is an extraordinary storyteller who uses compelling stories on which to reveal implementable solutions to his audience's own work. Inspirational is too simple word to describe Peter as a speaker and thought leader. He is a mover and change maker. Our world needs now more than ever before. He born in Liverpool, England. Peter is the co-author of the Wonderwall, leading creative school and organizations in an age of complexity, published in 2017, and Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, and Doer, innovative pedagogies for cultivating every student's potential, and it is just published by Corwin Press, sorry. As an author, presenter, and consultant, he explores learning, leadership, and innovation, and their impacts on individual and organizational health and culture. Through the course of his work and research, Peter has captured the voices of hundreds of students and adults alike, video clips that provide unique and insightful glimpses into the lived world of our classrooms, schools, and organizations. Peter has been the recipient of many awards throughout his 40 years career. And in 2013, he was awarded the Distinguished Leadership Award by the Ontario Public Supervisory Officers Association. In 2015, he was awarded the Global Distinguished Leadership Award by the Alberta Teachers Association. So we are on behalf of both the International Center for Innovation in Education, ICIE, and Baqa College. We are very happy and pleased to welcome our second speaker, Professor Dr. Peter Gamwell. His presentation today will be entitled Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, Doer, Innovative Pedagogies for Cultivating Every Student's Potential. So welcome again, Peter, and the platform now is yours.
Thank you very much. And we may just go through this sharing screen rehearsal to make sure that my videos can play.
Yes, I will give you the co-host now.
Okay.
So now you can share your screen. We see your screen.
Okay, so I need to go slideshow. I'm going to start with this one. I just want to do a rehearsal to make sure you can hear it.
Sure.
Do you hear that?
We hear.
Yes.
And
okay, then
yes.
That's good. So now I will. I'll start again. You know.
Yes.
Now, how do I go back? All right. Okay.
All right.
Perfect. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. It's such a pleasure to see such an amazingly diverse group of us coming together from throughout. By the way, I'm in Ottawa, Canada, just so that you know. I thought I'd like to share my ideas from three perspectives today. The first, I want to describe a creativity movement that I led from 2004 until my retirement in 2016 with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, which I believe will provide a glimpse into what I believe are some of the defining elements required to unleash the creative potential that lies within all of us. At that time, I was a superintendent with the school district. It was actually superintendent of leadership, but that quickly morphed into leadership and creativity to explore those interconnections between learning, leadership, creativity, and well-being, not just of the individual, but of the organizations and the communities. Secondly, I'd like to explore some ideas about why traditional education so often fails so many of our students and actually our adults alike. Because I think the more that we can understand this, the more equipped we can be to make the required transformation, the necessary transformation. And thirdly, I'll share some of my ideas about the founding, what I think of founding imperatives, beliefs, and conditions that need to be present, actually, that need to lie at the foundation of our learning cultures if we're going to bring that learning to life, if we're going to awaken the creativity. And I'll be sharing one or two stories in the book, Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, Doer. We actually draw on 8 case studies of organizations, of schools who are actually trying to make this shift happen, who are trying to make the extraordinary happen. So I'll start off. I had the privilege to serve as superintendent with responsibilities for leadership here at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, as I just mentioned, and led this creativity movement from 2004 to 2016. The purpose of this was to embrace the idea that there's a seed of brilliance in absolutely everybody. And we need to recognize that, value it as a central priority in our learning cultures, and ensure to find ways to tap into each person's potential, to bring it to life. The movement was called Lead the Way, and it involved, amongst other things, it was a series of events each year, 7 or 8 events. Some were very large, some were smaller. The big ones, we would have 2 international conferences each year, 500 or 600 people. And others would be just maybe celebrating, I don't know, custodial staff or office staff. So they were smaller events, but they were all focused on the celebration of potential in everyone. And they were inclusive to their foundation. So you would have teachers, administrators, custodians, office workers, parents, students, community members learning together and witnessing the creative initiatives that always featured as a critical aspect of each gathering. I decided I'm going to share a video with you. It's about 4 minutes long. And it's because rather than describe these events, I just think this will give you a glimpse into what we were trying to do. brilliant creativity rests within everybody. And it's, I think, a driving imperative that we, as the formal leaders, come to understand that and find ways of creating spaces where the brilliance that rests within everybody is allowed to really surface and to be ignited. When you ask people if they're creative, they get all nervous. And it's because they tend to associate creativity with the arts and very clever scientists. Creativity rests across the disciplines, and it emerges in people in all sorts of fascinating and unexpected ways.
Being an educator, you're in a service industry, and you are working for your students and for your families. And I don't know everything, and we need to stop thinking that we know everything, and we need to start looking to the people that we work for and to be bringing them into the conversation and to be listening to their stories as a way of learning.
When you create spaces which challenges our youngsters to think about what is it that they're passionate about, and when they start to really focus in on something that really interests them, what they then come out with is nothing short of remarkable, and it's inspiring to see what they do.
Some students, they say, can't really be trusted to do anything on their own, but I'm trying to say that students can be creative and can achieve good grades without straightforward directions, and just with an open-ended project, I'm trying to say that we do deserve that privilege.
We tend to want kids to fit into our picture, and that doesn't work for a lot of our kids. If we start looking at where our kids are coming from and learning what they come to school with and what their stories are, we can make school so much better for everybody.
The stories that people tell reveal the essence of who they are.
The fact that we have such a wide breadth of people that are here who are telling their stories that we might not have heard before because they've been marginalized or dismissed. I think it's a huge, huge success that we're giving voices to those stories. Today has all been about how stories can humanize our experience as educators and community members, and to really work out what it is that we're doing, what do we need to do, where can we go from here, and just to make the education experience as wonderful and as enchanting as possible for our students.
Reaching and teaching every child in every school, and setting the spaces in which it becomes paramount to them what their passions and interests are. It's about fostering curiosity.
Once you get to do projects like this, you actually think the class is fun. And
Yes.
I feel like it makes you more confident in yourself because you know you can do these things that most other people can't do. Today, we got to showcase that to all the adults, the vice principals, superintendents. It was very student-led today, so we got to voice our opinions and how we feel about these kind of projects. So that was the number one key for us today.
People who've been at this event today, no matter who they are, teachers, custodians, community members, go back to their own communities and try to replicate this artistry and understanding and openness, because it's through that challenging of assumptions, collision of ideas, and the sparking of curiosity, the real learning happens. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a glimpse into the ideas that we were trying to center our transformation around, and it had an incredible impact, that movement, and it continues to this day. So the question, the second part of this is, why is so much of our traditional learning not like that? Why doesn't it allow for the sparking of curiosity? Where is the challenging of assumptions? Why is that so often not a central part? And why don't ideas collide more? I'm not talking about negatively, although certainly negatively sometimes is required. So I'm going to move into the second part of this, and I'll show you a very contrasting video. Oh, hello, what's going on? Oh, there he is. Poor guy is stuck on the rock. Hello. So why on earth would I follow up with this clip? Well, I don't know about you, but in my own career, in my own life, I've come across a lot of people who, for one reason or another, get stuck on that rock and feel precisely like the turtle. And I include myself in that number. Throughout my career in education, I've found it happens a lot. In classrooms and schools, to educators, to parents, and unfortunately to far, far, far too many students, through no fault of their own. Now, the good news is that a lot of this is avoidable. What we need to do is to reimagine our learning cultures in a way that awakens the brilliance that lies within everybody. And at the core of my belief is that if you set in place the right conditions in your learning culture, you can indeed awaken this inner brilliance. Let's continue with a couple of videos of students which sort of illustrate the way in which conventional education can and often does have this harmful impact on many of our students, and indeed by extension on their families. I was recently working with the Renfrew County District School Board, helping them to go through this reimagined process. And as part of that, we went on a week-long tour of the schools, and we had open access to the schools. And this next one, I'd never met this young boy before. His name is Nick. I just happened across him in the automotive program, and something told me Nick had a story. So I just asked him an open question about his experience, and here's what he said. Here at Fellows High School in Renfrew, and I'm talking with
Nick Colbert.
Nick, and you're involved in the Specialist High School Majors program. What's the name of that program?
The Shazam Special High Skills Major. It is like
automotive?
It's yes, I'm doing the automotive one.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So this opportunity, has it been important for you?
Yes, it has.
Why?
Because that's what I want to do in life. I want to be a mechanic by the time I'm 25, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this has opened that opportunity. Yeah. When you heard about it, like, I'm trying to get a sense of quite how important it was for you. Like, has it done anything for you as a person to be involved in this, to have this opportunity in school?
Well, okay, so I have dyslexia and dysgraphia, and I do not like to work in a classroom.
Okay.
But what actually pushes me to come to school and get through high school is this right here.
Oh, wow.
Is exactly what pushes me through. It's what keeps me on the roll to go through high school.
That's amazing. So before this, your previous...
I was horrible grades, completely, like, just about useless. And then I started with auto class, and it all went up from there.
What's it done for yourself, your personal?
For my personal self, it's given me an experience of a lifetime and just helps me out as a person. I use it to control my anger and just everything.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Good luck.
Thank you.
Here at Fellows High School. So for 10 years, the first 10 years of his academic life at school, he felt that he was useless. I find it painful to listen to that. And this next young lady is just as hard to listen to. I'm going to be telling you about an extraordinary teacher in the third part of this. And Fiona, is this young lady, was fortunate enough to end up in this teacher's classroom. Her name is Rebecca Chambers. And Rebecca had celebrations of learning at the end of each of their courses, where all of the students in the class had to present through using different metaphors. Anyway, this is Fiona's story.
This is my second class with her.
Okay.
So for my inquiry, I did, these are 2 notes.
Yes.
This was from when I was in grade 6, and this was from when I was in grade 4. So my mom kept these over the years because she thought something strange was about them. So
Holy Jesus, that's powerful.
yeah, so in grade 4, okay.
Explain these notes to me.
Yeah, so this in grade 4, I felt like I wasn't strong with any school areas, so I thought I wasn't smart. I didn't feel smart. Things I struggled with, so I'm dyslexic. I have a hard time reading, spelling, math, talking, and a few other things that I thought just clearly when I was that age, I didn't know anything about the school system, but now when I'm older and I've learned a lot more, I can tell that the school system has clearly failed me. And that Miss Chambers, I appreciate so much what she's doing because she makes me feel smart. She makes me like remember that there's different types of learning and that just book smart, sitting at a desk, writing an essay, and handing it in on time isn't the only smart there is in the world. And for a very long time, I felt not like one of the smartest kids in the class just because of that.
Fiona, that's... I can't believe that your mum kept this. I want to meet your mum. And when did this one come from?
So this one was in grade 6. I felt like grade 6 is a big year. I felt like I had no friends. I didn't make the track and field team, but I'm over it now.
Wow.
I felt like I had no life, and then like again, the spelling is bad, but it says it sucks, and I like to kill me. I felt that bad about myself.
And that's just because of the experience that you've had.
Yeah, and this was in grade 6. So, but this is my.
So it begs a question, doesn't it? 2 16-year-olds who, until they came across, in Fiona's case, a remarkable teacher, and in Nick's case, an experience that just put his lights on. But until that point, they were both miserable in their experience. Why on earth does that happen? And how do we let that happen? I think for me, it's because of what I think of as upside downity of priorities. When an organization or a system places its priorities in hierarchical order over the priorities of the individuals and groups within it, this leads to policies, processes, learning priorities that if you didn't know better, you might think of being designed to take the creative abilities within people and stifle them on a daily basis. And we see this hierarchical tendency all around itself. It manifests itself on a global scale and on other scales. On a global scale, just about every country I can think of, the Department of the Environment is subsumed by the Department of Finance. So the health of the planet is put in jeopardy and placed at the peril of perceived economic priorities. And this results in a toxic imbalance and puts in danger the life of the planet itself. Similarly, in terms of education systems, just about every education system in the world places curriculum and a hierarchy of curriculum as the driving priority. But the curriculum isn't alive, it's inanimate. It's just a series of facts, figures, books, numbers, policies, procedures. But these documents have become sacrosanct and taken on a life of their own, increasingly so during the past 40 years of the reforms. In fact, the books, the facts, the figures have taken on such overwhelming importance that it's as though they've formed a cloud that casts a metaphorical shadow over all we do in education. And it prevents the sun from shining through. What we need to do, of course, what we need to prioritize are the people in the schools and the classes, in the systems, the educators and the students, because they are alive and filled with curiosity, seeds of brilliance, creative potential. We need to focus on those interests, passions, curiosities, and set in place the conditions to inspire and grow their learning. Is knowledge important? Of course it is. Is curriculum important? Of course it is. But the books, the information needs to be around the learning system, accessible at any time. When people are exploring the passions and the possibilities within them, then it becomes relevant to them. It matters. I think this sort of upside downity led to Nick expressing belief until he found the author program, you know, just about useless. And it's certainly what drove Fiona to feel in grade 6 that she wanted to kill herself. The problem is, of course, that there are millions and millions of Fionas and Nicks in the world. Children replete with all manner of abilities and passions, which are doused and ignored and stifled by a system that has it upside down. So what can we do? At the core of my belief, again, is that if we set in play the right conditions in our organizations, then these unique creative capacities, these potentials, will be awakened. Subsequent to my retirement in 2017, Jane Daly and I identified what we think of as 3 foundational imperatives and 4 supporting conditions, which we describe in the Wonder Wheel. I'll perhaps start by describing the 3 imperatives which we believe need to be at the foundation of our learning systems. First of all, we need to recognize that there's a seed of brilliance in everyone. Every single student and adult alike have seeds of creative and innovative brilliance within them, regardless of what their test scores or achievement levels in a classroom show. As we're fully aware, an individual's seeds of brilliance don't always lie within the typical subject matter taught in schools, such as math and language arts. I mean, the range of topics is infinite, isn't it? It can stretch from art to music to plumbing to leadership, friendliness, diplomacy, the ability to make others laugh, and a host of others. In today's society, however, those seeds of brilliance often lie untapped or undiscovered beneath the surface due to the learning priorities that inadvertently stifle curiosity and encourage students and teachers and others to keep their imagination and passions to themselves while at school, due to the perceived need to focus on core subjects. So we mustn't believe for a moment that a student who seems to show little potential doesn't have brilliance within them. Secondly, I think we need to challenge ourselves. If we're really serious about fostering these creative, healthy, dynamic learning cultures, we need to challenge ourselves to think and act continually from a strength-based perspective. We need to ask ourselves, what's the magic we want to achieve in this organization? And how are we going to make that happen? Not can we, but how will we make that happen? The reality is that in many of our organizations, they tend to get stuck in what I think of as a deficit mode of thinking and acting. Again, a symbol of the crisis of upside downity. They operate from a problem-solving perspective with the belief that the best pathway forward is served by identifying problems and then setting in place processes to solve those problems. I think all of us are aware of some organizational decision-making process that are approached from this perspective. A stark example for me is conventional strategies for strategic planning. You know, a group of people, mostly from the hierarchy of the organization, are herded into a secluded meeting space, usually deep in the forest, surrounded by birds to prevent escape. And then they're seated around a large table and asked on the first day at 8 o'clock in the morning, what are the problems in our organization? Well, let me tell you a secret. In this age of complexity in which we're living out our lives, if you want to ask people to identify problems, there's not going to be a shortage. And by the end of the process, in my experience, the blackboard or the whiteboard disappears behind the deluge of problems that have been identified, and people in the room are left exhausted and somewhat depressed by the negativity. And they know that the next step, the one where you have to plan to fix them over the next few days, is going to define how the next years will be devoid of free time. Gone is the March break trip. The other issue here is the modeling of this deficit approach to the organization. There's something in music called sympathetic resonance. Actually, it's in physics as well. If you put your foot on the damper pedal of a piano and then sing the note middle C will start to vibrate, as will all of the other notes which are mathematically connected to the middle C. And I think this type of sympathetic resonance can go both ways. Once the organization takes on this problem deficit approach, that can, through sympathetic resonate down through the organization. It's being modeled for the organization. So when you get to the classroom level, you're having teachers, to no fault of their own, it's deeply systemic. They're looking at the kids, and specifically with kids who are having difficulties with something, they continually perseverate on, boy, what's the problem with this child? And how can I fix it? When very often there isn't a problem with the child. But the problem for the child now is that when that happens day after day after day, week after week, year after year, you end up with Nicks and Fionas who come to really believe negative thoughts about themselves. So I think we need to flip our perspective from deficit to strength-based mindset, move away from thinking about what you're lacking or what you think you're lacking, and focus upon what you have. Identify what we've got and think positively about how best we can use it. I think this then becomes a journey into possibility and fosters a culture of positive thinking and learning that empowers people, groups, and organizations to make it a practice. And I mean that as a verb. It's a cultural shift that has to occur over and over and over again in order for it to become innate, instinctive, part of the fabric of the organization. I think if we can weave these first two imperatives, the idea that the seeds of brilliance lie in everyone, and then adopt a strength-based approach, we have a really good opportunity to achieve what I believe is the third and most important imperative, and that is to foster a culture of belonging. Brain science has been telling us for years that emotions play a crucial role in our ability to think, to learn, to create and retain information. That's because when we're anxious, we're too distracted by fight or flight instincts to learn the information or to retain the information. Our brains sort of shut down. It's called downshifting. And if you've ever blanked out during a stressful exam, you will have experienced this phenomena. So when children aren't in an environment where they feel safe to express their ideas, then they can't unlock their imagination and creativity, which is ironic because different ideas and opinions are, after all, the driving force of innovation. Let me show you another video clip. This is of a young lady called Grace. Grace had been in the traditional system up to the age of about 11, and she had struggled mightily. Unfortunately for her, about 4 years ago, a brand new school opened in Ottawa. It's a private school, and it was created by two teachers because their hearts were broken by watching so many kids not being serviced well by the system. So Grace went to the Blue Sky School, and I heard her story. And again, I'd never met her before, but I just wanted to hear in her own words the depth of the impact of the learning culture of Blue Sky. So I asked her the question, what is it about this? And if you had advice for the school system, what would it be? Remember, this young lady is 12. View and what specifically the environment is like so that they could set it up for themselves. Can you give me one or two critical things?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a amazing question. I think the one thing, the family feeling has been an amazing experience for me here. And like just really having that really close connection with your peers and your coach. I feel like this is a family. It's like my second family here at Blue Sky School. So how to kind of do that in your classroom is really just take the first couple of shorter weeks just to really get to know your class, just really to like one-on-one, because you also got to remember, if you're an educator or like a teacher or something like that, that they're to cater to the students' needs, not the whole classroom's needs, to really get to know, have that connection with the student, and then all else will kind of turn into place, I find, because then your student, a good connection with your student, good connection with the peers, and I think it's really like transformative. I'm using that word again, that the student knows that you believe in it, and I think the student can achieve him or her or they, and then I think the student will know that they can achieve great things, and it'll be really amazing to watch. So,
Grace, beautifully said.
oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. What an insightful young mind. Done for you. So that was Grace. The question, of course, then is how do we put this? How do we make this extraordinary thing? How do you create these extraordinary cultures within the context of the traditional school system? This is Rebecca Chambers, the lady on the left. She was a high school teacher, social studies high school teacher in Ottawa, and about 15 years into her career, she became deeply embedded in the Lead the Way campaign that I was leading. And she, as a result of that, decided that she needed to reimagine her own teaching and learning culture. So when you walk into Rebecca's classroom, there are no textbooks, there are no tests, there are no exams. To the untrained eye, might look a little bit like organized chaos. But at the start of each course, what she does is she asks her students to identify topics that really, really matter to them. Things that were personally intriguing and ideas they wanted to explore. And through that exploration, they needed to show how their projects made a difference in the lives of people, not only their own lives, but in the lives of other people throughout the community. They were to think of themselves as change makers. She challenged her students to present their learning in a way that was as engaging and as creative as the learning process itself had been. And this was such an exciting aspect of the project, as the students needed to come up with novel ways would help them teach what they'd learned to other students and to community members. So I'm just going to play a couple more videos which show the impact that this had on students and how it allowed them to express themselves in ways that they had not thought of before. This is Anika. Back again, yes. Because just as we turned the video off, you started just talking openly about some of the impact that this has had on you. Can you just give us a glimpse into the impact?
Well, you see, with the broad learning, you just find so many more passions, and like I didn't know, we instead of looking at things that we don't want to do, we look at things that we want to do. You know, there's so many possibilities. Like I found out things that I didn't know about myself before. You know, I didn't know I liked all this kind of stuff. Like I found a passion for human rights. I started.
So you found a
passion for human rights, like and helping other people. You know. I didn't realize how much that can help other people and you. Like I enjoy it so much, and it makes me very happy, you know, to change other people's lives as much as mine, you know.
So it's about learning about yourself.
It's learning about myself, and yeah, there's just so much learning involved, and there's so many people that can be impacted, you know, not just the people that are learning, but the people that learn from the people that are learning, you know. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Back again. And this fascinating young man who speaks, I think, to the imperatives and conditions in the most brilliant way. Here he is. This is Saxon. So, Saxon, I'm sorry we'll see you in this state. Tell me a little bit, what's going on, Saxon?
I'm being restricted by school. And
how on earth does that happen? School is such an open place.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that we're forced to do. There's a lot of stuff that we're forced to learn, and we don't really have freedoms within learning those things.
Okay, can you give me an example of that? So have you felt that right the way through school section?
Through most of school, I mean, like this class is a little bit different, but I would say for most of my classes, I've been told how to learn, I've been told what to learn, and I've been told what to present.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So this class is a little different to that?
Yeah, it is.
In what way, Saxon?
Well, you see, we have inquiries, which basically we pick an issue, and there's freedoms and restrictions within those, but we're given a lot more freedoms than any other class I've ever been in. So
what's that done for your thinking?
I think it's opened up my mind a lot, and I've learned to think different ways. I've learned to think way more creatively, and I've been given that opportunity to think a lot more creatively than any other class I've ever been in.
Well, I have to say, the metaphor that you're using of the jail and the handcuffs is very powerful.
Thank you.
I think, I mean, obviously having the autonomy, would you have ever done this in another class section?
Never.
What made you think of this?
Well, I think this semester hasn't really been a great semester for me in terms of grades, but I've been kind of frustrated because I've been thinking that in a lot of these projects, if I was given the freedom to do what I really wanted and to show what I really wanted and how I wanted to, I think I could have done a lot better, and I think I would have learned a lot more too.
Do you mean in your other subjects?
Yes.
Very interesting. If you had the power to do it, or let me rephrase it. If you could give advice to the public school system, thinking of the young people coming behind you, how you want their experiences to be, what would that advice be, Saxon?
I would say that I think we need to treat everybody as an individual and not have them as cookie cutter people. Everybody's different, and I think that everybody learns differently. And if we could figure out a way to have everybody learn the way that they learn best and the way that they want to learn, I think that everybody would be way smarter and we would advance as a race.
You have a remarkable mind, young man.
Oh, thank you.
Don't ever forget it. Thank you so much.
Hey, no problem.
So when you can achieve a culture of learning that really embraces these guiding imperatives and conditions, when you can weave them through the DNA of your learning culture, it's remarkable to see what happens. Magic is revealed, and lives, to use Grace's words, are transformed. In the new book, Jane and I tell many stories of people and organizations who are really going through this reimagination process and making things happen in very different ways within their schools. They're trying to open things up. So we tell many of those stories. And also, I just opened up a YouTube channel, which you can see many of these videos. Also, I'd like to say this: I'm always delighted when people reach out and share their own stories with me. So I would be really appreciative if you have stories that you would like to tell. And you can see me at peter@petergamwell.com. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this presentation. I am really grateful to you for this, we can say, challenging and encouraging presentation. And we are looking forward also to see your book in print, available very soon. Of course, there are a number of messages you delivered through your speech, and I hope we have the policymakers and people who are responsible for educational systems around the world to be there in order to listen, to these stories and to learn how could we overcome all these types of challenges. So thank you so much. And I think there will be a large number of questions relating to your presentation at the end of this symposium. Now, if you allow me, we will move to the third presenter for today. I would like to share my screen first. So our third presenter for today, Professor Dr. Connie Phillips. She directs Gifted, Talented, and Creative program at Emporia State University, where she received the award that recognized her impact on students. She previously taught middle school gifted students, provided consultation services for high school gifted students, and identified elementary gifted students in public schools in different parts, of course, in the US. She completed doctoral studies in elementary education at the University of Arkansas and earned a graduate degree in elementary education at East Texas State University and gifted special education at Emporia State University. She directs the Great Plains Center for Gifted Studies, where she studies giftedness, talent development, and creativity. She leads gifted program accreditation reviews and serves as the lead site visitor for the Council for the Accreditation of Educators Preparation. She served on the Global Principles for Professional Learning in Gifted Education Committee of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. For today, Connie Phillips is going to present a presentation, or to introduce her presentation, entitled Evidence-Based Practices for Gifted Education. On behalf of the ICIE and Baqa College, I would like to welcome again my friend Connie Phillips. The platform is yours. I will give you now the co-host to start your presentation. Okay, you're already there.
Well, thank you, Taisir, for this warm welcome and the invitation to be back with you again at ICIE. I think of Taisir as a mentor for me in the field of gifted education. And I'm so happy Joyce Miller, who I took my first class from Gifted Ed at East Texas State, is here with us today, as are Tina from Denmark and Jasna and Darko from Croatia and Christine from Canada and many others. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm actually going to take a pretty literal view of evidence-based practices, because what I do at Emporia State University, which is in Kansas, Kansas, by the way, is the land of tornadoes, and we're proving that lately here with our weather. Fortunately, the most recent one that leveled more than 1,000 homes was only an hour away from us, and we were spared that one. But we are in the geographic center of the continental United States. So this is my 18th year directing the Gifted program, where I train graduate students to work with students all the way from kindergarten through high school in public schools, primarily in Kansas. So what I'm going to share today is primarily going to relate to what I share every day with my students. And so you're going to get a little bit of a crash course in an 18-hour endorsement education program. And I also direct the, which can lead to a master's program in special education. Kansas is one of the states in the United States that approaches gifted education from a special education point of view. So I'll be referencing some of those distinctives as we go along. So I have 4 questions in 4 areas. The questions are: who are the gifted? How do we serve them with educational services? How do we assess them, and what types of support do they need? So you'll see that down at the bottom, and I'll try to highlight some issues and trends in gifted education that really relate to identification, curriculum, assessment, and advocacy. So who are the gifted? Well, a very common type of definition for the gifted is that they have substantially greater potential compared to their age peers. So very often it's not just performance or achievement, it is potential. So that's kind of tricky, isn't it? If, if we have to know what somebody's potential is rather than how they actually perform, there can be a great variance. And so I've heard Sally Reese say over 50% of all identified gifted receiving services are underachieving academically at some level. For instance, if a student's getting straight A's, that student could actually be underachieving. Kind of hard to think that way, isn't it? But it's true. So greater potential. Also, the potential that we measure is also varies by our societies or cultures. So if we look back over the eons of time, for instance, perhaps warriors were valued in China, or military strategists. And similarly in Greece, you might think of philosophers or athletes and so on. So any culture can put value on different types of talents. And in the United States, although we have a mandate at the federal level, and by the way, the Marlin report that was given to Congress in 1971 is where we derive our essential definitions, and then each state tends to take one or more parts of that definition, and they deal with it however they wish. So that type of latitude amongst the programs across the states is incredibly wide. So I'd like to say Kansas has one of the most, one of the highest requirements, because we do put it in special education. We treat it as if it is with an IDEA-like protection. So very few, if any, other states do that. Some states like Texas might have like 20 clock hours plus a test. But we all have something in common in that we're looking at supporting the academic potential of children and adolescents. That potential can be described as academic or intelligence, and of course that would be the classic kind of definition, perhaps identified through an IQ test, coming up really strong as a second runner up in these types of definitions as creativity or creative productivity. And of course, both academic and creative productivity are very important in gifted programs across the country and across the world. Visual and performing arts, we might think of as talents or even leadership ability. So we find all of these areas referenced in the Marlin report. And as we think around the world, and it's so exciting to be here, Taisir, thanks for inviting so many people and for bringing your Arab colleagues to, with the collaboration in Israel today through the college there. We are going to see perhaps only academic types of abilities identified in Europe and maybe Asia as well. But that is actually a pretty narrow kind of view, considering the characteristics of gifted children and adolescents. So next section, how do we provide services for them? Well, of course, it's going to depend on how we define giftedness, isn't it? But something else to keep in mind is that we have a lot in common with best practices. And I reference here, I don't see the hot link, but there is a URL included in the reference section for the top 20 principles of teaching and learning from 2015 that the American Psychological Association identified. So that was quite a project, and it's actually available in Arabic. I have the document saved in Arabic, so if anybody wants that, I can send it to Taisir to look at and share. So, keeping in mind that there are many principles across the board, across any kind of teaching and learning experience that are important. So we want to use best practices in what we'll call general education. But with gifted, we think of that as exceptional learners, and exceptional as in terms of special education or specialized services. I often tell my students that the typical types of curriculum changes that we adapt relate to 3 words. It's deeper, wider, faster. So of course, acceleration is pretty obvious. If we're accelerating a grade or a class, or perhaps even a topic, that would be faster. Enrichment can be deeper or wider. And we give opportunities for students to learn in their areas of interest that really benefit them, as they not only learn to develop their gifts and talents and creativity during their formative education in public and private schools as children and adolescents, but it can be very instrumental in guiding them toward their futures as adults. So it's a worthwhile practice to address these gifts and talents of children and adolescents. Another important type of accommodation or adjustment that we can provide in the P12 schools, whether it's elementary or secondary, is independent study. These students often have time that they don't need to be learning things that they already know, or should I say not learning, like Saxon referred to in Peter's presentation. Thanks for that. I love your turtle too. What a great reminder. So instead of just sitting passively, or perhaps finding ways to amuse themselves that aren't so productive and getting into trouble in school, these students can pursue their passions through independent studies. And there's a lot of great curriculums out there. The Renzulli learning system is really fantastic for that. But even just a simple allowing the freedom, as Saxon was describing in his video, in his little box and handcuffs, allowing them, unshackling them and giving them that permission and support that they need. So how do we assess giftedness? Well, there's assessment is a pretty broad word in the field of gifted education, because we can think of assessment as identification. Do they meet the qualifications of whatever is valued, whatever type of test is used? And secondly, do they actually need the services? So in Kansas, we look at a 2-prong identification through assessments that would be both qualifying through whatever is used, whatever means is used, as well as having the need. Some children and adolescents are happy where they are, and they don't necessarily need to be accelerated or enriched. And that's a choice that can be made. So I'm going to share with you, best practices are really pretty basic, aren't they? They're not necessarily new or innovative. They're classic, and they stay with us. And I love to teach my students this way. So multiplicity of data. I know this goes against practice in many parts of the world. In many parts of the world, maybe a 95% or higher on an IQ score is going to do it. If they score that high, hit that mark, they're gifted. But actually, best practice says we need a multiplicity of data. And why would that be? Because there are many forms of gifted, talented, and creative abilities. So if we use only an IQ test, or what if the child maybe doesn't have such a great day and maybe doesn't test well, although in general, gifted do tend to test well, we may not really see their potential. So in Kansas, we use this little acronym here that's in red, we call it griot. Maybe not very exciting term, but here are 5 ways that teachers and adults, parents, administrators, counselors, psychologists can look and see what evidence do we have of giftedness with these children. So one is referred to as a general education intervention. So maybe you give them an independent study, you give them a challenging assignment, you put them in the advanced grade level for a short period of time. You change something in some way to see how the child responds. And in that way, we're gathering data. So important to have some of those interventions. Record review could be grades, different types of anecdotal data that is in their permanent record or their file at the school. Interviews, how simple is that? Talking to the child. So often we work around the child rather than with the student. So it's important to visit with them and maybe ask questions and find out what they think and how they feel about school. And again, Peter, you did such a nice job sharing all those videos about the students up in Canada. Observation is maybe another form of looking at interventions, but seeing how they behave in school throughout the day, maybe over a period of time, and testing. So testing could, of course, be IQ, it can be achievement. There are a number of means to assess gifted. So I'm putting identification here because it does bring together a lot of concepts that are considered best practices. So first of all, if we're looking at programs and services for kids and in schools, student-centeredness is very important. So it's not about the label. It's about what the student, who the student is and what the student needs. And so we start with the student and we gather data. So that data is the griot that I just referred to, many types of data. A lot of those data don't cost anything. So that's always good. It's just training and awareness of how to interpret the data that we gather. A team approach is really important because students can act one way in school, another way at home. I always, when I taught gifted in Wichita public schools, in what used to be the state's largest middle school before I came to the university. And I can tell you that the more you have on the team, whether it's the school psychologist, maybe a counselor, the school nurse, an administrator, a general education teacher, a parent, and I always liked, and it's recommended at 12 years and older, to have the child sit in on some of these meetings as well as the identification process is going on. I like them even when they're younger than 12. So, you know, to involve them in something that's addressing their future as well as their present experience in school. The purpose of all of this identification is to advance the general education curriculum. And I can remember when I would have students, I primarily taught middle school students, and they'd say, we've never done this before, you know, because they were afraid, oh no, what if I fail, you know? And I would say, good, then we're doing what we should do, which is to advance the general education curriculum. So for them, that means taking some risks and learning some new things and exposure to areas of interest that they might pursue later in life. And as I said before, part of the identification process, it really is two-pronged in the state of Kansas, which is to qualify with whatever criteria is valued in this country, this state, this school, this location, and have need. And that need should primarily be determined by the student. A student may not want that level of challenge. Finally, we do have universal screening. Some of the larger districts like Kansas City have adopted universal screening procedures, and that is an across the board testing to see who might be on the horizon, who might need to be tested further for gifted services, so that not so many fall through the cracks. Because when we start talking about diverse students maybe who aren't the dominant culture need to have culturally sensitive testing instruments. Okay, so again, I'm going to expose you a little bit to curriculum that's formulated through a special education process, because I know that in Europe, for instance, many schools are really only going to consider gifted if they are within the arena of special education, which is unfortunate, but better than nothing. So when we're looking, and I think this can be used whether it's a special education environment or not, because again, it's adapted environment. So we have that data gathering process, and that data is gathered through that team approach of those different individuals, whether they're teachers, parents, administrators, and so on. And the data looks at the academic factors or information about the student, as well as non-academic skills. Maybe their functional skills, how their habits through the day, life skills, and so on. Their social and emotional characteristics, as well as physical. So things like eyesight, hearing. I mean, these are very basic. I told you I was taking a very, very literal view of the topic today. So all of those form what's called a present level of performance. So this is where the child is right now. So if that's where they are right now and they actually need services, they qualify and they want them, then we can formulate plans for them. When we're writing plans, the heart of the plan, of course, is based on the present levels of performance, but then you write goals that are going to really set the course of that student's educational experience. And when you're writing goals, and like I said, in Kansas, we do this just like all the other special ed teachers do, which is cumbersome and a real pain at times. But you know, it protects the students. So we're happy for that, and we just try not to complain. So any IEP goal is going to have 4 components, which would be right here, the time frame, condition. Whoops, I didn't know I couldn't highlight that with my cursor. Time frame, condition, behavior, and criterion. So that's part of what I teach my students to do, is it is a legal contract. They are actually legally bound once they have an IEP goal, number one, for the school to address that goal in an appropriate way, and for the student to have that freedom and have that accommodation to experience the things that are identified through the team approach based on data to come up with one sentence, and that is a challenge. So, you know, by the end of the school year is the time frame. So what's the condition? Well, it's when it actually happens. So maybe given advanced story problems in mathematics. What's behavior? Okay, so we want changed behavior. We're not just going to describe what they do, but we want to know how their behavior is going to change as a result of this intervention. So they are going to advance their mathematic skill, perhaps in critical thinking, creative problem solving, and so on. And finally, the criterion, which we like to think is going to be at least 80% or higher for a mastery level. But for gifted, we like to push it, maybe say 90% or higher on a rubric. Sometimes gifted kids, they need goals that will help them bring skills up to par. So not every gifted kid is good at everything. And many gifted students have more than one exceptionality. So, so there needs to be at least one goal that is measured at least as often as the report cards or grade cards are issued it's measured throughout the year and revised as needed. So again, assessment, as I said, it can be formative, it can be summative, it can be identifying, and these are all just, I think it's important, you know, when we think of that multiplicity of data again, of course, there's always going to be intelligence tests that are measuring mental constructs and hopefully are culturally sensitive. But if a child is creative, you know, is the IQ test really going to kind of discover these types of individuals, of students? So we think of creativity as domain specific. Maybe it's looking at thinking styles, whether it's convergent or divergent. And of course, it could measure any of the classic flexibility, fluency, originality, or elaboration, those types of thinking skills to see how do they think and what might benefit them. So the more data we have, the more we can provide the appropriate services for those students. Achievement tests are, of course, norm-based, but usually by grade level. So we know if they're already at the 12th grade level when they're in 2nd grade, then they probably need some acceleration. So these types of tests are also important, not to mention authentic assessment with portfolios, real life skills, kinds of things where they apply their knowledge and skills. All right, so one of my favorite areas, advocacy. You know, so easy to forget because we have a lot of myths that surround giftedness that persist. Like they don't really need any help, you know, they're smart. They're going to be just fine all by themselves. Wrong. So I had the privilege, as Taisir said earlier, to serve on this committee. My colleague Norma Haffenstein from the University of Denver had a vision for this a few years back. And a number of us from around the world sat on this committee, which took about 2 years to formulate. It was really fascinating. We tried to come up with some principles, really. You know, I know Taisir said something about in the chat that we invited some administrators and legislators. Well, if they're not able to be here today because they lack time, you can go to the website and download this poster and send this stuff to them because it really was curated from perspectives from all over the world. So tiered content just means everyone needs professional development. Those legislators, the administrators, the counselors, the teachers, and so on. It needs to be comprehensive in terms of covering all areas of the school experience, evidence-based, as we're talking about this morning, integral to the school, not just like over there in the closet. Well, that used to be the janitor room over there. That's where we have gifted, you know, over there in the corner, you know, in a space that nobody else needs. So no, that is part of the school broadly, that it holistically addresses the whole child, the social, emotional, the cognitive, all of it, that it's ongoing. And again, talking about professional development, broad in that it includes different types of curriculum, different types of assessment, that's sustainable, that it's affordable, equitable, that we remember that there are many types of gifted students and that we empower those who work with students through the schools. Here are the references, and you can, as I said, you can find those items. And I know that we're short of time, so I'm going to stop sharing and just thank you again. I see Peter has his hand up there, but Taisir, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Connie, for your presentation. And thank you so much for taking the time to prepare it as comprehensive as we saw. And it is really a wonderful presentation. And I am very sorry if you see some people writing bad messages, which I don't know from where, but normally when we announce the symposium, as you see, some people try to share it on the website or in the social media, and then it will be a very bad thing to happen. So I am very sorry for this, but we have to continue. And so this is the case. Yes, Peter, what you have? Peter Philly, what you have? We will start.
Peter Philly.
Yes. Your mic is mute. Okay, so I will proceed for the next presentation, and the next presentation is already recorded, and it is done by my friend and colleague Ken Reimer. And yes, Peter Gamwell, can you please go ahead before I proceed? Peter, yes?
No, I didn't have anything to say.
Okay, because I thought you would like to say something.
No. No,
I'm sorry.
I'm good. I'm listening carefully.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next and the last presentation will be introduced, as I said, recorded by my friend Ken Reimer, who is working at University of Winnipeg in Canada. Prior to his 25-year career in Canada's public school system, this includes positions as a mainstream special education and resource teacher, guidance counselor, and school principal in 6 different schools in 2 different school divisions. Dr. Reimer holds a PhD in education from the University of Manitoba. His primary research interests have focused on inclusive special education, school leadership, creativity, educational policy, graduation rates, at-risk learners, and teacher collaboration. He has served as president of the Manitoba Council for Exceptional Children. Dr. Reimer has taught at the University of Winnipeg, University of Manitoba, and guest lecturer at the Federal University in Russia and Cambridge University in England. He has presented a paper or papers at several different regional, national, and international conferences. And his talk will be entitled Positive Teacher-Student Relationship, Best Practices from Canadian Elementary, Middle School, and High School Teachers. And as you see, this goes in harmony with the presentation introduced by Peter also. So let us go to his presentation.
Hello, my name is Dr. Ken Reimer. I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Winnipeg. The title of my presentation topic today is Positive Teacher-Student Relationships, Best Practices from Canadian Elementary, Middle School, and High School Teachers. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss 3 studies that I've conducted beginning in 2014 that examined the recipe or the formula for what makes for good, positive teacher-student connections. It seems to me, when looking at the literature, that making positive connections is a vital component of school success for school children. And whether or not they make these positive connections with their teachers in schools can be a critical component of having academic and social emotional success in the school. Because students who are connected both interpersonally and institutionally at all levels, from kindergarten to grade 12, generally seem to have higher grades and graduation rates. So one thing that I would like to say here today is that I did 3 studies. The first study I did in 2014, and this was a study that sought out Manitoba high school classroom teachers. In fact, I had 9 teachers who signed up for the study, and I invited them to participate in a think tank-like focus group. And it was designed to better understand what they believed that they did to successfully connect with young people in school. In 2018, I replicated the study with elementary classroom teachers. I had 8 teachers participate in those focus groups. And again, I just completed about a month ago in 2022, The same study I replicated, but this time with middle school teachers. Unfortunately, due to COVID, I couldn't get the numbers of participants up to the numbers I had in previous studies. And so I managed to get 4 participants for that middle school study. Before I go any further and talk a little more detail about the studies that I did, I just want to share with you 3 symbols, okay? The first one on the left that you can see is a bandage. And underneath that, you've got the words incentives and authenticity. If you, for whatever reason, don't listen to the rest of my study, or you can't remember all the details that I provide, I want you to remember the symbol for high school as being a bandage. And the key words that you need in order to successfully connect with students would be incentives and authenticity. The middle picture that you see, the middle symbol, is a log cabin that's lit up, looks pretty cozy, and it's found in the middle of the woods surrounded by a blizzard or a snowstorm. And the word underneath there is kusli, which is Norwegian for cozy. And I want you to remember that for elementary teachers, the symbol that I'd like you to remember is that your classroom is like a little warm log cabin that sometimes can be found in the middle of a blizzard. And your job is to make that classroom cozy or kushli. The final picture on the right is a picture of a rose. And underneath that is the word ephemeral, which means temporary or fleeting or very short-lived. And I use the picture of the rose, and I'll discuss it a little further later on, because it really symbolizes the relationship in the story of the Little Prince and the Little Prince and it had with the rose, that despite the rose being very dramatic and at times could be very demanding at times and could be very difficult, it only blooms for a very short time. And the prince really loved this rose. And although at sometimes we found it difficult to imagine why you could love such a demanding creature as the rose, it is this love that made all the difference. And so these are my 3 symbols. On the left, the bandage for high school. In the middle, the cozy log cabin for elementary school. And on the right, for middle school, you'll find the rose. So when I did my 3 studies, the first study I did was in 2014 with 9 high school teachers, and I wanted to find out what is it that these teachers did in order to connect with high school students. And I found that there were 3 key components. Number 1, high school teachers did what they could to find similarities and shared interests between themselves and the students. And they talked about a variety of similarities and shared interests. For example, if teachers had a similar culture or language to some of the students they were teaching, they found that this was a great connecting tool. Hobbies, music, television, pop culture, things of that nature. These were also really good avenues to connect with students that they were teaching. Current events was really important. And finally, social issues. These were really, really important things to discuss with students, and it seemed to provide a good mechanism to connect with them and successful connection. Secondly, teachers talked about providing incentives in terms of helping students with their needs and their wants. There were many students, particularly struggling students or students who could be deemed as being at risk of dropping out of school, and they required consistent academic and social assistance. And teachers in this study talked about how critical it was for them to help students with their needs and their wants that extended beyond the classroom and maybe curricular activities. So things like math help or ELA help or opening their room at lunch or after school were important. Also having food available for kids. Once a teacher talked about baking 2 loaves of bread every day for his morning class, and this would ensure a lot of students showing up on time. In fact, they would show up early because they wanted to get the first slice of bread. Loaning out money, microloans was also a component of connecting with students and providing them with some of their social needs. And so not just coaching teams, but also creating clubs or areas of interest where kids could gather together, make some friends, connect socially on perhaps maybe a similar topic of an important subject. And finally, being viewed as authentic. This was very critical, that teachers felt that they needed to be viewed as someone who sincerely cared about the kids, that was legitimate in their eyes, that could be transparent, that would give the kid a voice. And so teachers said that being viewed as authentic was very, very important. And this is very interesting. If you look at the research, Bourdieu talks about, from an economic perspective, talks about the importance of capital in everyone's lives. And that is, all people have capital, including our students. But capital isn't just money and stuff. It's more than that. So it's more than just economic capital, but there is also cultural capital. This is what you know, what you learn in school, what you learn from your home. This is important. There's also social capital, and this is who you know and the importance of this. And Bourdieu talks about the fact that, you know, social capital, cultural capital can be converted into economic capital. And it can also be inherited. And so teachers talked about incentives being economic, moral, social, but areas in which they provided different forms of capital to students, and that students would be drawn to this, and this would further enhance and make successful connections with their teachers. And so combined with these incentives is authenticity. Gladwell calls this legitimacy and says that if you want to have the principle of legitimacy, it means that students have to have a voice, and the teacher must be viewed as predictable and fair, consistent, if you will. Now, authenticity, legitimacy are both good words. I think one word that kind of summarizes both of them would be sincere. The teacher is viewed as sincerely caring and having the best interests of the students in mind, according to the students. And so a bit of a formula for recipe for success would be an economic response of providing economic, social, and moral incentives combined with the principle of legitimacy might make for successful connections with students. A simpler way to say this, a simpler recommendation, is if you want to make positive teacher-student connections at the high school level, it is a combination, it seems to me, of incentives plus authenticity. Now, this is a big challenge for high school teachers because in Manitoba, most teachers are contractually obligated to be present at work for about 6.5 hours a day. And within that, they get a lunch period. And then, you know, there's some time in between classes where people move around. So at the end of the day, there seems to be about 300 minutes a day for teachers to teach their subjects and connect with their students. 300 minutes a day. If a teacher teaches 4 classes a day and they average about 25 students per class, that means that they see about 100 students per day. 300 minutes of teaching and contact time divided by that 100 minutes really means that teachers have about 3 minutes a day per high school student to make a successful connection for teachers. And this can be an overwhelming and very, very daunting chapter. And that is why I used the symbol of the bandage. And, you know, one of the things that I think is we hear oftentimes in school and all sorts of social institutions and services is the idea of a Band-Aid solution. And this is frowned upon generally. People say, look, I have an idea for this, and someone says, well, so that's just a Band-Aid solution. We need to come up with a more deeper, get to the roots of the problem solution. We can't just put a Band-Aid on everything. Gladwell, again, to quote him, talks about the fact that in reality, bandages are often overlooked and greatly underappreciated because they might in fact be the most significant medical technology in the history of humankind. You think about it. If I'm working at a restaurant and I cut my finger while I'm preparing some food to be served, I could either go home and lose a day's pay, food will not be served, or I could put a bandage on my wound and I could get through my shift before I could take greater care of that wound later on, perhaps, or not. At least it would be covered and protected. If I want to play tennis with some friends and I get a blister, we could either stop the game entirely, I could tend to my blister, it could pop open and we would have no game, or I could put a bandage on this wound, this blister, and we could continue to play. And oftentimes, students at the high school level will come to school with wounds that have been there a long time. They have been there since early childhood. And simply the time that classroom teachers are afforded to try and tend to all of these wounds, there just isn't enough time. And sometimes what teachers have to do through incentives and authenticity is apply the bandage. And this is actually could be considered a best practice. And so please don't overlook this analogy or this symbol. Now, in 2018, I decided to replicate this study as a faculty member at the University of Winnipeg, and so I did it, but this time with elementary school teachers. I brought 8 elementary school teachers together, and I said, look, what do you do to connect with your teachers or with your students? And I want to look for similarities, and I want to look for differences between the study I did with high school. And I found that in the literature, strong relationships with teachers is especially critical for children when they first enter the school system. It might be the most important time for positive teacher-student relationships to occur, because even though they benefit students of all ages, they really benefit the young children. And I found 4 different ways that teachers connected with students when I asked the teachers. First, they always attempted to meet the student needs, and each teacher spoke of the monumental number of needs that young learners need to do as they first enter school, in their first few years of school. They have a lot of needs, and teachers did whatever they could to meet them. Secondly, they felt that this was a chance to give students voice. Teachers, in order to connect with students, needed to empower students to express themselves and discover their own interests. And even though they may not be able to write these ideas down because students don't have the ability to print yet when they first enter school, many students don't, they would even act as their scribe and write stories together. But empowering students to express themselves, discover their own interests was very, very important. Incorporate what they've learned from students into their daily interactions with curriculum. So if a student was fascinated with space or volcanoes or whales or Dr. Seuss, then teachers did what they could to try and incorporate that into their curricular lessons in the school, because they felt that if students could connect themselves with the curriculum, then there was a better opportunity for teacher-student connection as well. And finally, teachers spoke about creating opportunities for shared experiences. And so Harari talks about this, about creating collective experiences, I believe it is. But I'm talking about shared experience. So teachers and students would read books together. They would play together. They would create stories together. They would act together. They would do all sorts of things. Teachers talked about getting down on the floor and being at the kids' levels rather than being an adult looking down at the kids and the kids always looking up. But creating any opportunity for shared experience. One teacher spoke about how they went outside at recess and played with the kids, and that made all the difference in connecting. They'd go in the sandbox. They'd play in soccer games. They'd even play, hide and seek with the kids. All of these things created opportunities for shared experiences. And so this created the big theme. And I've got a picture here, a home away from home. Really, participants in this study did whatever they could to connect with their students like caring family members, because they saw great benefits in connecting with the student, but not just the student, the entire home. Elementary teachers in this study stated that connecting with siblings, connecting with parents was really, really important in order for them to connect with their students. They wanted students to come into their classroom and feel like their classroom was a home away from home, and that their classroom was like a family. One teacher talked about the idea of creating word walls. And so they spoke of the fact that on the first day of school, each student's name would be printed and posted on the walls of the classroom, so each student could find their name. And so it was like as if they were there. One teacher talked about grandma brag books. And what this was teachers would take photographs constantly of the kids in action, doing things in the classroom, doing things together. And at the end of the year, they would collect these and put them into a bit of a book. And so the student could look at the book and see all the things that they did, a bit of an informal yearbook, and all the activities and things, kind of like as they compared it to, the teachers compared it to like a grandmother having a photo album of pictures of their grandkids, and the teachers want to do this. One of the components that a teacher talked about that I thought was quite important was they talked about the importance of touch, and teachers want to talk about this, that this was really, really important, that touch was important. While teachers all acknowledge you have to be very appropriate and careful with this, they spoke about the fact that these kids will sometimes run into the classroom and hug them. and they felt the need to hug them back. Sometimes they wanted to just be reassured and have our arm around them and said that everything's going to be okay, like they would do as if they were a mom to their own children, as one teacher said. Sometimes kids need it. And one of the stories that was shared really connected with a Canadian audience because it can get very cold here. And this was the wearing your mitts. One teacher described that there was a little girl who was having some home issues, a lot of home issues, and she would come to school, and one of the problems was at morning recess, when it's very cold and wintry and snowy outside, the student would go outside with mitts and always come back forgetting their mitts, and their hands would be raw and cold and red. And every day the teacher had to rub the hands and a little bit remind the student very firmly that they couldn't keep losing their mitts because they were freezing their hands. And no matter what the teacher reminded the student of, the student continued to lose her mitts. And so one day, as the teacher expressed frustration about this to a colleague, the colleague said, you know what, I noticed that what this little girl does every day just before we come in at recess, the girl intentionally takes off her mitts and intentionally puts her hands in the snow, and then comes running inside because every day she wants that teacher to just grab her hands and rub her hands and warm her up. And so teachers talked about the importance of touch. I spoke a little bit about connecting with the family. That means parents, that means siblings of the children. Some teachers expressed that, you know what, if I'm teaching this child, I'll probably teach the younger sibling in 2 years. And so if I'm going on a field trip and I'm bringing my class, why not invite the parents and why not invite that younger sibling, preschool child, to come and join along so that on that child's first day of school, they've already known that teacher for a couple of years. I thought this was really a great job of getting ahead of things. And so because families are so complex, because teachers acknowledge that home life can be very complicated, because oftentimes students don't know where their parents are. Sometimes there are children who are in care and have a social worker, have a classroom teacher, have parents, have biological parents, have foster parents, have so many different parts in their lives, that the one thing they can do is their classroom can be viewed as a cozy log cabin, or the term kushli, which means cozy, make their classroom very kushli. This is very, very important for teachers, and they all seem to share something that described a kushli classroom. They said that oftentimes, because there was no one magic solution to connecting with kids, they provided examples of how they had classrooms adorned with cozy carpets, photographs of classmates, inviting play areas. Even sometimes teachers talked about sneaking in their pet dog for the classroom on a Friday because they wanted their classroom to feel like a cozy home away from home, and they wanted their classroom to be viewed as a group of caring family members. Oops. And this is interesting because I found that the one term that seemed to connect this is the term kush, which means cozy, and kushli, which means a certain feeling that you can use that evokes warm and fuzzy feelings. Teachers said that for many children, their life outside of the classroom, outside of the school day, feels like wandering through a blizzard. You just can't see where your next step is going. There is no consistency. And so one thing that the teachers say, that even if kids spend their nights and day, out there in that blizzard, when they come into the classroom, it feels like a cozy log cabin. There's something to eat. They're warmly greeted. It's nice and warm. There's a book that we can read together. There's some interesting stuff we can do in the corner together. And at the end of the day, we bundle that kid up and we send them on their way. Not every kid goes outside to a blizzard, but especially for the kids who do, this is absolutely critical. And so do what you can for elementary teachers to make your classroom feel cozy or kushli. The other thing that I just want to share is the importance of routine and rhythm. Teachers spoke about this. Oftentimes routine, structure, order can sometimes be met skeptically, that we want kids to go out and simply find their way throughout the day and experience learning on their own terms. In fact, elementary teachers said that one of the ways to connect with students, because life cannot be very consistent outside of the classroom for many kids, is to ensure consistency in the classroom. This was critical for elementary teachers. And so teacher-initiated routines that were, as Garrett says, student-centered, are instrumental in creating an optimal rhythm for learning and also for teacher-student connections. And so they spoke about the fact that whatever you can do to bring in student-centered routines is great for creating a rhythm in the classroom. And so I just thought that I would share that with you because it seemed to be an important part. Don't forget rhythm or routine to the classroom. My final thing that I want to talk about today is my study that I just completed about a month ago that I'm just in the midst of writing up and doing further research on. And this is teacher-student connections in the middle school. From a Canadian context, this would generally mean students in grade 5 through grade 8, although sometimes with the schools, they only have grade 6 to 8. Sometimes there are grade 6 to grade 9. But in most cases, middle school here from a Canadian context means grades 5 to 8. And here are some early thoughts based on interviews, based on the focus group, the think tanks that I did with 4 middle school teachers. Here are the insights that I have collected that I'm still trying to sort through, but let me share with you some early thoughts on this study. First, I used the term stuck in the middle with you. It seems key for me and for any of you school administrators, school principals out there, it seems really, really critical that if you are in a middle school, find teachers who especially want to teach in a middle school. This is absolutely critical. You want to have teachers that can think of no other place they'd rather be than with middle school teachers, with middle school students, because middle school students can be a very difficult and unique group of students to work with. And it's not for everybody. And so you want to find teachers who, more than anything else, want to connect with that wonderful group of middle school students. Secondly, as one teacher said, look, you got to be explicit in your language when you're working with middle school teachers. And so in the conversations that I had with the participants in the study, many of them shared that when you're trying to connect with the student, be intentional. Tell them exactly what you're doing. They may not realize what you're doing. So say to a student, hey, I really like your jacket. You know, I'm really trying to connect with you. You seem like a really interesting kid, and I'm trying to connect with you. Be intentional. Be explicit with your language of what you're doing. They may not recognize or realize what you're doing. Give them the opportunity to connect with you because you're being clear to them that you are open to making a positive teacher-student connection with them. Number 3 is find middle ground. You have to recognize that students in middle school are constantly have 1 foot in the world of the child and 1 foot in the world of the teenagers. And some days, maybe from 9 to 10 in the morning, both feet are in the world of a child. And by 2 in the afternoon, they're trying to put both feet in the world of a teenager or even a young adult. They're going to constantly be fluctuating between these worlds. They live a very it's very fluid between the worlds that they travel to. And so the time they spend between these 2 worlds is very short, but this is really critical from a developmental standpoint. This time when they travel between these 2 planets of the child and of the teenager. In this case, you as the teacher need to be the constant. You need to be on firm ground and allow them to float between these worlds or planets. The final thing is discovery. Middle school students want to learn about themselves and connect with themselves and figure out who they are. This can be referred to as introspection, but they also want to connect with everything that's going on in the outside world. They want to learn about what is going on out there beyond themselves. This is extrospection. Your job is to act as their guide through this as they learn to connect with themselves and connect with the outside world. Act as their guide. And so the symbol that I use comes from the story The Little Prince. It's a short read if you haven't read. It's very popular. It's been published in many, many languages, more than I can count right now. And there's this particular poignant scene between the little prince who goes from planet to planet, but on his home planet, he makes this great connection, has this relationship with the one rose that lives on his planet. And the word that I used to describe middle school is similar to is same as the word that I used to describe how the little prince described the rose. And that is ephemeral. And ephemeral means very short, fleeting, temporary. The time that a rose blooms is very short and fleeting and temporary, and often not recorded for historical purposes because it's not permanent like a mountain. And the prince spends much of his day caring for this rose, and the rose is really challenging. The rose is really demanding, and it only blooms for a very short while when the sun is up. But this time is absolutely critical. In fact, for the reader, we often read the story in this relationship between the little prince and the rose, and we go, how can the little prince possibly love and care for this rose when it's so demanding? And yet this little prince absolutely adores and loves this rose, and adores and loves taking care of this rose. Because if you love taking care of this rose as it learns how to bloom, as the fox describes later to the prince, that's what makes all the difference and gives meaning to life. And middle school students can be like the rose. They can be demanding, they can be challenging, they can bloom and be absolutely beautiful. And if you love and care for them, this is what can make all the difference. Listen, thank you for listening. If you don't remember all the details, I hope you remember of the symbol of the bandage, the cozy log cabin in the blizzard, and the rose that blooms. Thank you very much. I wish you well. I hope we can connect.
So first of all, I would like to thank Ken Reimer for this presentation. He is now in Brazil because he is working for a project, and this project is a joint program between Winnipeg University and local educational authorities in Brazil. And now I think it is time to open the platform for questions and answers. So if you have, of course, if there is questions in the chat room, we will, because of the time constraints, we will answer these questions in written form. And now if you have any question, please raise your hand and tell us for whom this question is, and then we will start. Any question or comment? I know after a long time of presentations, because we started since 2.5 hours, I know that everybody is a little bit tired, but even though, okay, Heidi, you can start. We unmute your, okay. Okay, you can unmute now.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Heidi.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank all the presenters because their presentations have been very much important nowadays in this globalized world we are living in. And I appreciate the presentations deal with how the students, how we as teachers should be concerned with our students' needs, but not only learning needs, but social needs. Because sometimes we try to isolate education and we try to be worried about syllabus, about programs in general, books and contents to teach, but we try to forget what is happening in their minds. And it's really, really important to take into account what is happening, what are their sufferings, if they have eaten or not. We are living in a very much complicated world. So that's why it is very important what you have presented today, mainly regarding connecting with students and families. I mean, not thinking that we have to leave all these problematics to the personnel who is in charge of worrying about these problematics. I don't know there, but here in Ecuador, in all schools, there are like psychologists who take care of the problematics in schools. So generally teachers, if they find a problematic, the students are referred to that place, right? To that person. But I don't think it should be that way. I mean, we as teachers need to be concerned about what is happening. And we have to find a way, as these magnificent presenters, as Don, Peter, and the last one, I don't remember exactly his name. Yes, to be worried about what is happening and to incorporate it into our classes. It is fundamental, and that is connection, and that is interdisciplinarity. And this is innovation in pedagogy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi, and I hope, first of all, thank you for your comment. And I would like to remind all our participants that if you please to be concise and, direct to the point, because we lack enough time, to continue. And we welcome you from Ecuador and from other parts of the world. We have presenters from many countries today, so thank you so much again. And any comment from our presenters, because as you see, we have 4 speeches. The first one shed light on a unique foundation theory. It was, Don Ambrose introduced unique foundation theory, and he introduced a framework for excellence in education, of course, and highlighted implications for innovation education. Then Peter, he was talking, how could we develop, the right educational settings in order to encourage innovative performances, and also to be excellent environment for both individual and institutions. And third, we have also very specific excellent practices in gifted education. When Connie Phillips was talking, or she was talking about multiple screening and identification process, and how could we label the gifted, and based on what, and what is the rationale. And then we ended with, Ken Reimer talking about the dynamics, the social dynamics in the school settings and in the educational system in general. So any other comment? Yes, Peter.
I'd just like to express my gratitude for some of the lovely comments that I'm seeing, not just for my presentation, but I think it's lovely the way people have acknowledged in the chat section all 4 of the speakers and the ideas which we've expressed. I'm one of these people. I'd love to stay in touch with people because I think the very fact that we're all here means that we share a very deep commitment to making sure that we push for transformation of learning in our environments. The status quo is simply not acceptable. That's why I show those videos. That's why I show Nick. That's why I show Fiona, because it's not those 2. There's millions of them out there. And we've a much better balance in how we do things. So I'd love to stay connected with you.
Thank you, Peter. And we promise you that both, organizations are presenting, or making this symposium, and we will make more in the near future. And also, we have a number of colleagues here we can see them in the screen. We have Muhammad Sandu from physics. We have Maher Bahlul from also education. And we have Christine Boykohead, and she has a new book called Mind the Gap. We have John Freeman. She is one of my main mentors, and she is, as you know, one of the well-known experts in the gifted education. So today we are lucky to have all these people around in this symposium. Of course, every one of you is valuable and added value to this symposium. And as I told this before, Peter, yes, we will keep the platform open for communication and collaboration.
That's great.
Yes, Rawhiya.
Thank you so much for wonderful and fruitful presentations. Thank you, dear Dr. Taisir and our eminent professors. First of all, I have to thank the next second two presentations for it's a part of my specialization. As you know, literacy should encompasses cognition, affection, sociocultural, cultural, historical, creativity, and ethics. I wanted to know or to give me a clue for the learning culture, how we can approach these upon the learning culture in functionality in an applied way, because literacy empowered the child to develop to let him to criticize, to be empathetic, to be self-efficacy, his identity, all these many recipes in learning culture. Because some of the presentations, two of them are in applied or evidence-based. I wanted to know the sense of these implications in the Arabic world. Thank you so much.
For whom your question? Because if you are addressing this and you are talking about the Arabic word,
I think Mrs. Connie and Dr. Peter Gamwell. Maybe the professor, the first professor, sorry, I forgot his name. He is talking about the dogmatism. I think, you know, that.
Yeah, Don Ambrose was talking about dogmatism in his presentation, yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. So who would like to start? Peter, you can, then Connie, and then Don.
Can I get the name of the lady who was speaking, please?
Rawhiya.
Rawhiya?
Yes.
Rawhiya. I'm going to forget that. I'm trying to write it down. My pen has run out of ink.
It comes from spirit, soul.
Ah, lovely. Well,
thank you.
Is a brilliant question. And I think if any of us had the real answer to this, we wouldn't be sitting here. We'd be buying an island in the tropics because we'd made a lot of money out of it. I sort of anticipated this question, Rawhiya. So a little earlier in the chat, I linked to a document about 5 years into the Lead the Way process, 6 years. We wanted to get to a more practical. We'd done a lot of research on what are the conditions under which creative and healthy individuals and organizations flourish. We asked that question to thousands and thousands of people, not just within our school district, but across the community and actually across Canada. So we thought in 2013, we would actually put that research together. So it would be a very practical document to helping people to make these types of transformative learnings in their schools, so that it actually translated into practice. And you could see through that Lead the Way video, it did. We were modeling this as we went along. So I would encourage you to go and take a look at the document. I think what you have to do, though, as an organization or as a family or whatever, I mean, you heard my foundational imperatives and beliefs. I didn't get into the 4 conditions that we support those, but you can read about those in the book. But it's about having that foundation which you believe in. And once you've got that, making sure that you involve as many people as you possibly can, because as soon as you leave somebody out, then you have an exclusive environment. So you have to be fundamentally inclusive. You have to have your philosophical grounding, and then you have to move it to practice. And using an appreciative inquiry approach, put the lens on the magical things that are already happening and encourage those forms of learnings.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Connie?
Taisir, could you
If you have any comments?
could you please repeat the question so I can address it more accurately?
Rohia, you would like to repeat, but in very short way.
The relationship between learning culture and the basics or the foundations of literacy, starting from cognition till the ethics, especially the sociocultural aspect of the dimension.
I'm going to primarily address learning environment. Learning environment is actually what we would call a standard in gifted education. It's at one point, I think hidden curriculum is referred to in different ways. But if you think of the learning environment as the unspoken or the hidden curriculum that's always there, as Peter said, or I think it was Peter, yeah. No, it was Ken, so beautifully described that environment. And I think it makes such a difference, you know, for gifted and for instance, it's very important to have them feel safe intellectually or emotionally and socially. And I certainly think that would relate to literacy in a number of ways, because gifted can be have a tendency toward perfectionism, which can relate to fear of failure and so on. I see Joan Freeman is here with us. I know, Joan, you could really take this one away. As could Dawn, and probably will. So that learning environment is critical and so often overlooked. So I'm glad that you're studying it. I'm glad that you're making a connection with it, because I think it does cut across many aspects of learning, as you said, ethics and so on. So very important. I think Ken really nailed it. I wish you were here to address it. It was just, Taisir, please tell him how much we enjoyed his presentation. I'm sorry he wasn't with us. So I'll leave room here for Don to jump in. I hope that helped.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you. Yeah, Don Ambrose, you have to talk about dogmatism. It is a long story.
Yes.
Yeah, I always love talking about dogmatism. It reminds me of when Bob Sternberg and I started those 2 projects on dogmatism about 10 years ago. We got leading scholars involved in writing chapters for these 2. And the interesting thing we discovered was that really smart people would end up arguing with each other over dogmatism. The way I described it is, one would say, you're dogmatic about dogmatism, and the other one would say, no, you're dogmatic about dogmatism, back and forth. And we found that one of the scholars, a critical thinking expert, Linda Elder, pointed out that their research shows that dogmatism, intelligent people are not immune to dogmatism. In fact, they can be more dogmatic than dumb people because they figure out creative ways to make their dogmatic ideas justified. So there's that. Another element of this is when we're talking about the practicalities of school systems, in many parts of the world, the schools are captured by
Hocam
dogmatic.
bağlanıyorum ama dedim yabancı bir yayın dedim. Adam da bir bozgu bozdu.
The schools are captured by dogmatic assessment frameworks. In the USA, for example, we have a lot of standardized testing for a couple of reasons. One is the dogmatism of policymakers, and another is the profit making of testing companies. But in terms of the dogmatism of the policymakers, they are captivated by the idea that you can precisely measure everything that's worth teaching. And one of my other projects is collecting ideas about dogmatism from different scholars in 20 different fields, none of whom know each other, but they are all saying the same thing. One of them is William Byers, a mathematician. He calls it sterile certainty, the excess of attention to and love for precise measurement of whatever you're measuring. Another one is a ethical philosopher, calls it reductive megalomania and shifting a muck heap with a teaspoon. Shapiro is a political scientist who calls it the flight from reality in the human sciences. And I've got 40 different quotes from 20 plus different disciplines, all of them saying the same thing. There's something really going on there. Let me see if there's one more thing. Yeah, so the school reform agenda is a big issue. One other aspect of this dogmatic frame, sociocultural thing, is that there were years ago, a couple of decades ago, there were some sociologists who were studying the way kids speak to each other. And ultimately it turned into, here's how they think and communicate. And they studied, I think it was in the Carolinas in the USA, they studied inner city impoverished kids, mostly African-American, and suburban affluent kids, mostly white. They discovered that the suburban kids were speaking in linear, sequential, verbal, symbolic ways that aligns with standardized tests. The inner city kids, the impoverished ones, were speaking in metaphorical, non-linear ways, bouncing from one idea to another. And that kind of thinking is punished by standardized testing. So those kids would never get in the gifted program. However, that's exactly the way Albert Einstein thought and spoke. So those kids were being punished for thinking like Einstein. That makes you think, doesn't it? I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Don, for this brief description. It is brief. And I would like to stop here. So first of all, on behalf of the International Center for Innovation in Education and Baqa College, I would like to say many thanks go to all our presenters for today who made this international symposium a successful scientific educational event. And also thank you so much for your continuous contribution to the overall success of our programs. Many thanks go to all the participants and organizers, and looking forward to meeting with you again in the next events. Thank you so much. And now I would like to say have a good night and wishing you all the best. For the Arabic participants, if they would like to continue in the symposium, you will have a meeting with Dr. Bahaa, who is director of Baqa College. Then you can talk maybe about some reflections, some translation, and some thoughts about this symposium and about the content already introduced by our distinguished speakers. So thank you again and have a good night.